to The Nation, which I hadn't seen before, the article on the Manifesto by Berman.
Yes.
And one by Marcus was very good too.
I haven't read them, but yeah, you'll tell me.
Well, Marcus discusses it more as literature. You know, starting off Faust, a specter is haunting Europe, you know, and picks out all the wonderful qualities. Berman ends up much more politically, but as I was leafing through The Nation, and I haven't finished it, I came across this debate that occurred, what was in Berkeley, and letters about Barbara Ehrenreich and people who believe in cultural studies.
Oh my God, you mean so-called debate. I think that...
This was much more than a so-called debate from what I can read in the letters.
Yeah, it goes on, doesn't it?
Yes, it's been a long debate.
So, you know...
This is the conference at Santa Cruz.
What?
This is the conference out at Santa Cruz.
Was it Santa Cruz? I forgot where. And, you know, as a person who's sort of innocent about it all, in one of the letters called someone comrade so-and-so, obviously for various purposes of using the term comrade. I mean, I use it in class today when I'm discussing Soviet history, but kidding with the kids. But that's what it's about, it seems to me. What does this give us in terms of understanding the forces that it can produce social change? That's what...
Yeah, absolutely.
Is Barbara Ehrenreich considered...
Go ahead,
She
Randy.
was considered by this group...
Answer
No,
that, Randy.
Barbara Ehrenreich... Well, go ahead, you go. What I read in the letters...
That's a strong way to put
All I've seen is the letters. I didn't see that there was a Nation article
Right.
devoted to it, I gather.
Yeah.
An issue of the Nation.
No, I think that in some ways the question is really relevant to what we're doing, because we're, you know, as I understand it, the questions about the relationship between emergent ways of understanding things, and hence drawing upon certain kinds of theoretical sources, and one's availability and openness to at least pay attention to those things, and that they come from within certain political concerns, and they also have a politics, and the way in which we think and talk about things matters enormously. You know, on that, at least, if there are two sides to this, and I'm skeptical that there are two sides. I think that if there are two sides, everyone's got them going on, including the Barbara Ehrenreichs and the Sokols and the social texts and the Derridas, you know, and you can read their stuff, and they're sort of, you know, pulled back and forth. So it's almost like it's a problem of having overly clear categories for thinking about the present that seem to create a divide that it's really hard to find, I think, in practice on any side, you know, and from any quarter. But I think where I see people agreeing is that language matters. There's a politics to language, and people have sort of different ways of thinking through what that is. You know, one position seems to be saying we need to make sure that when people on the left are writing and speaking, that this is available to anybody. Right? And you know, another position is saying, well, in a sense, all language is in a sense technical, in that it comes from a certain place.
Were they complaining about language in the debate?
You know, I think that's one way of talking about sort of what's at stake in, you know, when someone says this is conservative.
Yeah.
I mean, the accusations have flowed in both directions. There's something called postmodernism. It is conservative because it isn't engaging certain kinds of historical processes of social change, certain kinds of actors, certain kinds of issues of justice, and the like. And then on the other side, you know, there's an insinuation that people who are unwilling to reflect on recent developments and apprise themselves of contemporary intellectual currents are conservative in a different way. That is to say, literally, they want to conserve their ways of thinking and speaking against influence by these other currents.
Self-preservation.
Self-preservation.
As far as I understood from the letters to the editor, the students were, graduate students were in a conservative position, I think.
Meaning this conservative position? Which
Yeah,
conservative?
Conservative in a sense that...
Randy's been very good. He's multiplied everything.
Everyone.
Reactionary or something like that. They were not open to their thinking. They
Right.
wanted to cling to
Right.
What?
Well, this is what is complicated about it. I think
What?
anybody who wants to make things different is going to want to hold on to something. They're going to want to conserve something.
Yeah.
So that's why, to me, it's interesting. Everyone could be justly accused of being conservative X, Y, or Z. I don't know anybody who wants to sort of give up everything that they've got, no matter what it is.
Yeah.
Well-
So yeah.
I'll just say this so you'll know, for sanity's sake, that I'm laughing because
I see smiles, not laughing.
I'm laughing because I was thinking, I was finishing up my class at the Graduate Center, and after really having an interesting, I thought, course, someone said, is that all it is?
Oh, no.
So I
heard
wondered,
that song, too.
having ended that way, let me tell you, that's the punchline. Here's the story. I mean, in some ways, I wanted to, and I think I probably almost said this at the beginning, but I don't remember anymore, but it's in there somewhere, that I wanted to skip right over all of that. And actually, my attempt to be so abstract was to not get into that debate. In part, not because I don't think it's important, and not because I haven't been part of it endlessly, lots of places, with lots of headaches. But because at the moment, I'm interested in taking up how do we get past the impasse of there being two sides? And I'm interested in reading one side out into something else, the post-structural side, that for me comes out of Marxism and psychoanalysis, which has huge roots for us all. And so I start there and keep on pushing it to raise whole new questions, like what is a social force, not which social forces, which may be what you would like to discuss. And know you're doing politics when you do that. I know I'm doing politics when I discuss the social force of economics or the da-da-da. I'm interested, what does the word force mean with the transformations of technology? Or what does the word social mean, in fact, So, for instance, you take a Freud and you say, well, Freud's Oedipal or unconscious it's 19th century, it's, limited. And so people can say in discussions, I don't want to do that, and I know why we shouldn't do it. And you have to usually say, the polite thing to say is, okay, because we all accept. But when you say the word like social, you can't just say, I don't want to do it, that's a 19th century term. Frankly, I think it is, But we haven't reached the limit. Some people have announced the end of it. As a sociologist, I'm sort of interested in wondering if the term has a limit and what. So I'm very abstract that way at the moment. I'm interested in thinking very differently than structure and individual. I'm interested in a different aesthetic, virtualities coming out of compositions. I think someday it is, foretold here. I think someday it is how we'll talk. But I don't know if you ever announce this is how we'll talk and it just happens. But slowly, I think there's going to be more motion in the words we start off with. And where what we presume is attached to what. Because this whole, I'm a big structure, there's a figure standing in front, is very slow to me. It's too slow. The notion that something might, sort of defer into something else and that we might be all on one line or one plane, much more interesting to me. Say, well, what does that mean? I don't, so when you say social forces, I go, I'm just being honest. I think I don't want to even think the word social forces, never mind answer the question. But, okay, what will it do? Oh, I think, I'm going to answer your question though, for me, and then you can all talk again. Politically, I think the world is changing, and without new language, we won't be in it. I'm talking now as a social scientist or an academic, artist, whatever. Those of us who want to think about something, which should be anybody, I suppose, but, and is. What does globalization mean? What do localizations of globalization mean? I mean, we can say that so many times, but it's pretty serious stuff, actually. What does it mean to have cultures in your face in a different way than we used to? What does speed mean? What does electronic money mean? I mean, where will that all come down? Or you could say it another way. I mean, everything I learned in my life, and as I say in my class, looking at your ages, yes, was based on the modern coming out of something before it. And I think we're at a moment when the modern may be the something before the other thing. And so all our language, as you were saying, is usually out of some other one. And we weren't exactly around at the time when the one we're looking at was forming itself. And we still talk Durkheim as in terms of feudalism and then capitalism, this and then this. I think that, whatever that desire to talk about postmodernism is to sort of recognize that the reference point is not going to be that there's going to be a different reference point. And once you say there's a different reference point, the whole notion of referencing might even be different, right? So you might not just say, oh, now we start in 1972. We might not even talk about history that way, which was my idea of talking about television as a new historicity. Because really, we complain all the time that our students not only don't understand our history, I don't mean personal, but that they don't understand history at all in that sort of way. But they may have some other language going on that just looks a little stupid to us, but I doubt it. I doubt that everybody just goes stupid like that. Oh God, I hope so. So politically, I think a lot of it is about recognizing new agencies, even new human agencies. Women, and then right away it isn't. Or you could go that way. You could do the identity politic version. People of other cultures. Learning to listen and wait for the production of their politics, maybe not ours. So, that's a possibility. That we're having a real monumental shift of power arrangements. Maybe not. I mean, God knows I'm not underestimating first world power, so you'd have to keep on looking at that. But maybe comes other places. That's one thing. Different actions may be necessary than the usual kinds we know. Are we talking collective movement? I don't know, maybe not. Right? I mean, it's really important to not... Now, let me say one more thing about the nation. I've had it up to here with the left policing the rest of the left, because you can't move unless you know how it's collective, and you can't move unless you know how it's against the economy, and you can't... I can't do it anymore. I think it's just cutting out too much.
You can't keep repeating the errors, of labeling those of us who disagree with social fascists, that type of, which is important, which is happening.
Yes,
in a different way.
In a way,
and
yes.
I agree,
but we do need to talk. I'm not saying.
I don't know. Something mentioned something, but as I read the letter, there was a reference to an issue of the nation in which I guess someone had an article and there was responses to it.
Who was
Cathapont.
And my view, whether to read it and then join together in a discussion, something like that. But
it's not happening though. There's a lot of tension.
Right.
Well, no, among us, that's what I'm saying. We're not interested in pushing a political point of view. The reason I came here is I wanted to understand something, a movement I did not understand, and to determine whether it had value in terms of my teaching and my political viewpoint.
Well, Randy said it right. I mean, it's between a transformation of the very fundamental concepts itself.
It's a destabilization, I think all the ground's been pulled out of all of these concepts. And I was listening to some stuff from Jeremy Rifkin talking
Which is
about
very distinct.
what's coming down the pike in biotechnology,
Definitely.
that the way in which we're just starting to try to catch up to what's happening in telecommunications and electronic technology, and we're not even really geared up
Not
in
close.
terms like species become destabilized. Now you don't even.
I mean,
all
if you can
biological
destabilize that one,
boundaries-
you're got, it's all,
That's it.
Take marks from there. I mean, if anything else, I've hoped that I laid a lot of groundwork so for the next 3 years you'll say, oh, maybe she meant that, or maybe she meant that, or maybe she... Because actually, it is what I meant, all those things. It's funny you used the word because I had written to share the word ungrounding. I mean, because, we've talked a lot in this debate about taking away foundations, but I also think that's already too much. It's like not losing ground, but letting it, you used it very nice, drain out. And it's going to happen again and again faster. It's not going to take 400 years to unground and reground. We're feeling it sort of much quicker because of some of those changes. I don't know if we know what politics is going to be in all of that. I don't know.
You made that point.
I
Just
really
like-
don't
I know
know.
I should have
I'm
waited.
sorry, yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me.
Yeah, you're right.
It was kind of related to what you were saying yesterday. I was looking at some literature on some things that say, I'm familiar with it. The citizenship debates.
The what?
Well, citizenship.
Oh, yeah.
That's quite
There's a big one.
interesting because there they're talking about, well, there's the migrant workers.
Yep.
There's the women's citizenship issues, and
Yep.
also there, it comes in, and then what kind of democracy, when you say democracy, what is it? Is it a package deal? Is it a process?
Yeah.
Is it something communitarian? I think is it
I've been
all
definitely
things
thinking
has
that
to be-
word.
and
That's a big
to
word.
me, that was, I think, very interesting, and I was, as I heard you, that kind of pushed me in that direction, kind of question those, because, and I think that's the determining, or not, it will help, I think, choose one's politics.
Yeah, can you go on about that a bit? You mean thinking, I think that the assumptions about democracy and the relationship of, and I probably said here, private, public, state, economy, as those shake up, I'm not so sure we know what democracy is in the way. I think, you even want to think maybe for 5 seconds about not being, I would very privately in my house, about not being for it. There have been other times the left is not really for democracy in some ways when it came as a package. It's a very hard thing to say, and I don't think you should run around saying it too easily, but, a lot of it isn't what it is. But you were just saying the other thing, what is a citizen? What is civil society? What is privatization? These are issues that we don't, I'm assuming, as I was saying, my gosh, we're all leftists, right? But we may not be, but I assume on the left, or at least critical, where we don't think the job is to just say, oh, isn't that nice? Where you're thinking, how do I break into it? Well, if you don't know what it is, how to break into it becomes very difficult. And
So, one of the things I found very helpful about
You
your
have a cold too. I hear it in your voice.
about your interventions is it's also giving us some tools to suspend that impulse to rush in to the structure of either or.
yes, I really would like
yes,
to do
no,
that.
win, lose. The phenomenon you were referencing with those letters is a perfect example of that. People would say, what's this about? Well, it's a debate between postmodernism and Marxism. That's absolutely false.
So annoying.
From top to bottom, and yet to the extent that that's the structure in which people would orient themselves to this thing that's happening, it's going to be impossible for people to do the politics they're already doing, because they're going to have to stop most of what they're doing in order to take sides. And the sides, there's nothing on the sides. To the extent then that we could say, how do we deal with that situation when the
That really has
positions
been-
that we've inherited to do the work of politics aren't enabling us in very day-to-day ways to sustain the issues that come up in the forms that they come
I
up.
was very intrigued with your statement that at certain times we may have to wait to hear from other voices. Because again, with the Rifkin thing, I had heard a conference a long time ago on the whole question of patenting genes and the implications for agriculture,
genes.
especially,
Yeah.
GENES.
Which blows me away.
It blows us away.
By the
Not
way,
to mention selling,
to talk about simple
overt
politics.
statements that water is no longer going to be considered a right,
Yes.
but that it's
Yeah.
going to be considered a commodity that you have to have resources to have
Citizen
access
questions
to.
there too, like life
But
citizen.
the people who are mounting the biggest set of questions, and for whom the issue of patenting genes of agricultural plants were women from Southeast Asia. It was a wonderful conference, and very exciting perspectives and very exciting points of view coming out of that. So I think that when you said that,
to listen to other voices.
subaltern, whatever you want to call those voices, that there are voices that are going to be emerging, that are going to be very exciting, that have wonderful power, but we have to
and we
find out how to
will
listen to
join
it.
and support, but we may not be the first one saying. And that's hard, isn't it? Isn't that hard?
No, not for me. I was actually around to see what people are going to say.
I like
before I
talking,
say
so me telling. As soon as I'm finished, let's wait for everyone else. But I mean that seriously, and thank you, because it's true. And that's an interesting example that you take a subaltern voice, and we'll pretend we know him, with a high-level biotech issue, that it's almost more interesting that it comes there instead of us who are sort of high-level biotech. Maybe we can voice the interesting combination of we want it, we need it, and you can't do this to us in a way that maybe we can't really live. Because we have it, we don't need it, we can't give it up. It's a different kind of experiences of necessity and freedom there than maybe we know how to do, which is always about politics, isn't it? It isn't just about being right, although we forget sometimes. It isn't about having the right line. I mean, I know as an academic sometimes I'm sure I've been a certain politics because I also took the pleasure of thinking, and I am right. I mean, I never could say that out loud, even now without laughing, but maybe, maybe I wasn't good politics, but, being right was a piece of that. But it is beyond right, isn't it? It's about the relationship of necessities and freedoms, maybe. I'm very interested in talking about finitude. I think a lot of our politics coming out of Marxism hasn't been. Randy and I could fight, and nicely, I'm sure.
A lot of it has been intolerance, right? I mean,
No, I don't mean that. I mean more conceptually. I'm talking. It's not been, that stuff too. But come on, that happens all the time. It's too bad, but we do fight like that. But come into a feminist group, about that kind of stuff. No, about finitude. I'm not sure politics having created. Sometimes we think of freedom as beyond, out of finitude, history transcending, subjects transcend. That's why I'm sort of interested in that agency, because that agency may be deeply embedded, at least at the moment, in finitude. Because I, for instance, one of the voices I've suggested we don't know how to listen to is not people's voices, but objects, let's say, or biotech. What is that? I wrote down, share this expression, corporeal trajectivity prior to subjectivity and objectivity. I mean, you have to be at a certain level of technology but we can all imagine that. Trajectories of corporeality before big configurations like subject and object. You're talking about gene structures. It's before, subjects that to us now are man or human being or good all the literature we've written, there's big things moving around with big structures, but that's not big. It's before those configurations. And to talk about some of the issues you were just talking about, you got to almost get down there to that level of force, right? And think of it as political, because I think it is political. But maybe I don't know what's that politic quite. But that's definitely the way I'm thinking. And also architecture, or, you go to other spaces, because I know you're interested in planning and stuff, I mean, the way we do cities, maybe it's going to undo itself to great destruction, I fear, but, it's not going to look like this either. I was thinking you might find, I don't know why, I was a little moody this morning because I was tired. I haven't slept well. And I thought for the first time, I thought, oh my God, I'm going to get even older than I already am getting, which is really scary. I mean, it's unbelievable.
You'll still never catch up to me, so relax.
I'm truly grateful. I want you to know that. But I thought someday, and my mother is, 88, and she's going into sort of a deep depression. And, if you think I'm energetic, I always feel very slow next to my mother. So to see her slow down like that has really disturbed me deeply. And it's always on my mind. But really, I have this clear thought through my window there. I won't be here for the later discussions. And I wanted to cry. I thought, who cares about being alive? I almost didn't care about, being alive. I thought, I won't hear, I won't see anything happen sometime later. Isn't that weird to think a thought like that? So it's, but I guess it made me think there really is other times and other thinking. That I feel them. I feel the future in my head. So that's what's on my mind.
Intimations of immortality.
I feel my death and I feel the future in my head. They're coming close together, I suppose, right before you go.
I have immortal dreams.
No, but I don't, I hear you, and that's right. I also guess I was thinking I won't be there for them, but I see future, which is what I think is missing in some of those battles.
Yeah.
It's not fighting over the future, it's fighting over the past. It feels to me sometimes.
And that would be a much more interesting formulation of freedom than something you could have now.
Yes. Yeah. And that's why waiting for others is also sort of a nice thought to have. What would be the outside of our moment? And
Well, you can see the broad outlines of where our lines of thinking have led, and it certainly would be refreshing to have other lines of thinking.
There's a politic. Because it is disturbing. I don't know if anyone does better, but we have begun to see the limitations of our dreams. Yeah.
I think it's interesting too, because you do start to see a future. You do start to see a future emerging, and whether or not the future that you see emerging is any better a prediction than all the other people who.
Oh no, I wouldn't say that.
I think it might be.
Really? That's very exciting.
I think we can see broad outlines. I think we can see broad outlines more clearly.
I mean, the reason, I want to say one more thing that I'm not sure of, but the reason you might start talking about futures too is not a future. The reason I want to say that is it's not a future of the past. It's really a future. So I think we're used to knowing our past will lead to that. I think that's why they're fighting over the past. They're fighting over, we know the future from our past, and I don't think that's true. I think that the future really comes not from a past, but from a future. And so that's why I say maybe you're right, it could be better because it'll use different elements than our past gives. Can you imagine that? Because I can actually imagine that thought. But I've had help imagining that thought from thinkers who've made me think you could say that. Like Deleuze, for instance, that a future can come from future rather than from the past, because that's a different kind of historicity. And I find it intriguing because we might be having transformation of species levels, life levels. So then you start talking even different, then it doesn't just evolve, it's not
All
just
the boundaries,
dialectic,
all the
it's
old
not
boundaries.
evolution, or, it's other things.
I mean,
And that could be a big human mistake too. I know that.
Let me express the difference.
Yes.
Okay? To what extent are we, and this is what I would say is politics, right? Are we relating to the hurt being felt for those who don't have the advantages we have? When you talked about the
Yes.
global economy,
Yes.
what about the engineer in Seattle who's lost his job to a person in China, as Boeing builds factories in China?
Yeah.
What about,
Oh,
if you will,
What about
the
the
median
women in
income
the
of
free
both workers
zone?
being lower now than it was in '89?
Yeah.
Well, okay, I'm just saying. you
I know.
If someone's talking that this has political connection, I think unless somehow there is some discussion of what's happening to people's lives, and that's in the present. Now, I'm not talking about the past.
Yeah, I know.
Unless one is saying something about that, I, if you will, given how I've been brought up in terms of what I think, I find it hard to grasp its validity in terms of my understanding of the processes of the world. And that, if you will, that's what, I came here to see if I could grasp hold of something. And I must admit, I don't find, when I put it in those terms, that I do.
Give you Cannibal Holocaust
Excuse me?
to watch. Nothing. It's okay, Jack.
No, well,
Sorry.
you can either say two things to that. That's, I don't know. I could say data down, as we used to say in graduate school. Are you sure? Are you sure you have all the data? I mean, if you want to play data games, are things worse? Should we stop thinking about things that I was just thinking about because we're sure things are, all the bads right now are connected to thinking that way? Because that's part, let me just say that,
Yeah.
that's part of what goes on in the nation, that people like me, really me,
Right.
I'm a better version than some, but people like me are responsible for the suffering because we were...
Well, I'm not saying that.
No, I know, but you have to hear that because that's the argument being made because we're refusing to think about that. So then that's what you were saying before, then I'm in a setup where I don't know what to do. So how do you answer this? I think we could change our politics about work and labor too. I think we should start there. And I'm not so sure you're ready to do that, are you? I think we could have different politics than, what do you want? Get that guy a job? You want to, I don't know, maybe we need to really wonder about our labor politics. I'm ready to do that. I'm interested in some people who are talking about no work policies.
Stanley.
Yeah, and the gang. I'll go there and beyond a little bit. I've heard some interesting arguments by people who are even a little neater with their data than Stanley.
There's a wonderful old story about player piano on it, of Kurt Vonnegut, an early Vonnegut story. But we haven't gone down that path. Maybe we will. That's the path of people sitting around with so much time on their hands because there's so much material abundance that...
We should go down that path, but we're not. I don't know what
that's a
that
path we
is.
haven't gone down. Kathy?
But I do.
Right.
I don't want to say I didn't hear what you just said, and I don't know
No,
for
and
sure.
the reason I...
Yeah, what
want
did
to
you
get
have
to-
there?
I'm not talking about what the nation is saying. I'm talking about what, the official statistics are. And just throw it back at Reagan, throw it back at anyone in terms of what's happened to people's lives.
Yep.
And unless we can say something about that, and it isn't simply more leisure because the people have to eat now,
I didn't say
right? And
more leisure. I said no work.
I believe that there has to be some connection with people's lives. And if you want to say, well, that's not my concern,
I didn't say that.
no, okay.
We all love those statistics, Jack.
What?
I think we all use those statistics.
Yeah.
I know, and I'm just saying that, but how does, if you will...
Well, what is your answer? What is your answer to the...
I don't have an answer. That's the point I'm making.
Well, I think...
20 years ago, of course I had an answer.
Me too.
Okay.
We had the same
Now the thing is we
answer.
don't even have questions.
We had the same answer, and I loved it.
Right.
But You know, I think that I do recognize the question of the laboring body, or the laborer, or work is up there, isn't it? And we have some things to ask. Should work, well, we've always asked this question, or maybe we haven't as Marxists. Should work be the way you get to eat? I've always thought it shouldn't be, for God's sake. I mean, you may think that's too frivolous, but we better ask that question. Should work be the way we eat?
Sure, Marx asked it.
What?
He asked it.
Of course. Didn't he say no in the long run?
Yeah.
Well, in the long run, of course, work is
And I find
the process of transformation.
Yeah.
Well, but we're moving towards a
I'm quite
point where you're not
serious.
even going to be able to drink or breathe, because I think air, that's coming too.
I said.
Oh, go. Yes.
Now, one thing is,
And by the way, I want to say one more thing. The thing about knowledge, because you're also talking about what's the answer to this question. And knowledge has become profound. I mean, I think this is also a piece of the problem, more than the solution. I mean, knowledge has become deeply embedded in that technology too. And I think we're a little stunned by how we could stand outside the very statistics we produce. And that, I mean, there's no sense that they just speak for themselves to most of us anymore, even though we use them.
Well, it's been great fun. Sorry I missed the kind of tie-up last week.
Yeah.
But
Well,
I'm
it's
going
a good
to
one.
play.
The tapes.
And a piano.
Yeah. and maybe you'll come back, or we'll go there or something.
Okay. Okay.
Especially if
We'll go to the future together.
If the cultural studies minor does start to develop.
Oh, please.
Maybe we'll be looking for connections with people who can help us design the courses and stuff like that. Right?
that would be fun
Right.
to have a connection with some graduates.
Well, we used to call these articulation agreements. Do you remember those?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Remember
right.
those terms?
We have those.
Where
You had them with all those
What is
in
it?
college.
you work with a graduate school that participates in some of the curriculum design, and at the same time gives a stamp of approval to the courses such that they are recognized
Right.
We used
by
to do it
that
with
graduate
community
school as
colleges,
bona
not
fide
kids wanted to come here.
prerequisites and things like that.
So what
perhaps we
about
could cooperate in
teaching?
some way like that. What about teaching? Huh?
Yeah, did you want to talk about a little teaching? No, you
A
don't.
little teaching, I think maybe
No,
also
I wanted to just share an observation.
Yes.
Coming to this has made me think that some of my experiences could be put into a theoretical framework. So I wanted to share with you like a little anecdote, like different forums for people to communicate. I've been hosting this chat room about business writing, and so I've learned all of this lingo. And one of the things in terms of statistics that I've discovered about the internet is that all of these hits and so forth are a kind of commodity. And people sell access to the sites based on the number of hits. Many of the hits aren't really real, because people can sign in with different names. So I'm realizing that this is, even though it seems like a brave new world, it's very infiltrated with
spamming.
all of the capitalism and all of the commodification that is familiar to us already. And also, I noticed that all of the big providers, Netscape and InfoSeek, Lycos, all of them, they have now segments that they call community. But the quote-unquote communities are bought and sold. I mean, that's the reason.
yeah.
That's the reason that InfoSeek, a couple weeks ago, went way up, because they had bought a community in Southern California.
They bought several of them, right? In other words,
Yeah. But the idea of the community, which probably the community members feel is real. I mean, the people who talk to you,
it's like the guy
Yeah, but it's a
who
real
said he killed his, right, that was a community of people on alcoholics. And Remember the guy
Oh, the
who
guy in
killed
Rancho
his
Santa
wife?
Fe?
Was it wife or something?
His daughter.
His daughter, right? That was a community of people who have alcohol problems and they speak to each other.
On the internet.
On the
Right.
internet.
No, I don't know about that.
There's two things that you said about that that intrigues me, and I don't understand it yet either. I mean, I don't know how to deal with it exactly. Is your sort of, you know what, sort of sound.
Yeah.
Because capital's sort of invisible there until
Yeah.
you really look for
Very
it.
much.
So, absolutely. But that intrigues me. It's everywhere, in fact, and yet harder to see. Or and there, for instance, I don't know how if you can just talk about the social forces of capital in our lives that we used to be able to talk about. I don't know how you talk about it. It's so enmeshed with the information itself. I mean, it's like everything you used to imagine when you said, you know what could happen here when you first started to read Marx. You know where the extreme point is? It's almost like it made it there.
Yeah.
I really know that. I just don't know what you do with it when you get there like that. I mean, you wrote this, that it's so pervasive. What's the politic? When it's so pervasive. It's not about not knowing it. You have to know, of course. The other thing, though, is it's sort of interesting to me because there's the freedom, no freedom. There's also software getting sold, not getting sold, and people constantly doing big moves of freeing up code sources and stuff that are, you read about that too.
Shareware.
Really, yeah, sure. Which is sort of, it's still a struggle, there. I don't know.
I have an observation, a little incident about that too. When I'm a representative, I'm called a community leader. And so when I'm online, I have a certain designation to lead this chat. And it's business writing, it's not, improve your sex life.
Yeah, right.
But people come in, sometimes that have other agendas.
I want to sell
But-
Proving My Sex Life. It's a business, so could we get out and discuss that?
Right. So this week, when I was online chatting with, this is unrelated to the next thing I'm going to say, but people, you don't know when you're chatting with people, their age, their sex, their location. Sometimes I'm talking to people in Malaysia.
Well, the name gives you the gender away, doesn't it?
No, they use code names.
I see.
Absolutely.
And so
you really don't have
You don't know. You don't. So you're having a non-sexist, non-racist, non-geo,
so to speak.
Yeah.
so to speak, conversation with someone. Well, last week, when I was online, my daughter in Massachusetts came on because she knows when I do the chat. She came on under one of her screen names that I don't know. I don't know all my children's screen names. And she was chatting with me.
The horror.
And then a hacker came into to all of the chats. They have 4 or 5 chats going on at the same time.
Story.
A hacker, they think a hacker, who knows what it was, maybe
Did your daughter also not know that was you?
She knew
knows
it was
it's
me.
you. Right.
She knew it was me.
Okay.
She had
And
the advantage.
there was another person online, a very serious person, who's writing a book that I've been working with for a couple of weeks. And so while we were in the middle of this, and all of us are there for different reasons,
Needless.
a hacker got into all the rooms and knocked off everybody who had an administrative
Position?
function.
Yeah.
So that anything I said or typed
eliminated.
was eliminated and went into the void. And it was interesting what they did. They came in and
Machunen.
they started tampering with the advertising headlines. The advertisers pay to have space. So they came in and started doing things with the advertising
hackers.
headlines. So one of the people who was trying to get rid of them, they can ban them from the room. They can ban them from the system. So they were typing. It was like they were riding a horse, trying to catch the person.
So interesting.
And she said it's probably some 11-year-old.
Yes.
Could be
And that led me to the idea that
But they are
sadly,
11 years.
thinking
They are 11 years old today. That's-
almost any young person you could think of, other than unfortunately kids in the ghetto, has a
They have-
superior command of this
Yeah.
technology.
Is that true? But I mean, they do have access.
They have a command of it.
I don't think it's
I mean,
closed out.
the kids in the ghetto have access too. I mean,
Yeah.
they're finding ways. But do you know
They
this?
do.
I mean, are you saying something you know? You're not just assuming that, you actually,
The kids in the ghetto,
Yeah.
I teach,
Is there a way
I
to
do
know?
a moonlighting job at,
Yeah, okay.
in community
That's
college.
us.
None of the students in my class,
They're not-
one girl has access to a computer, that's all.
and so that's how they want, because kids are getting it just by having access, they're messing around.
Yeah, yeah.
How did you find out about your daughter being there? And could you tell
called
it
me.
was your daughter ever?
No,
Isn't that
she said, I'm a student. I said, what's your major? She said, psychology.
You didn't say who's your mama.
Who's your mama?
Everyone say who your mom is right now. And her name was something like Chi-Chi or something, like, you know.
She get that? That's funny.
I found out one of my other daughter's names, one of her names is NYC Sammy. But that's nothing I ever would have in a million years.
You know, it's interesting. I mean, there's been, endless debate, and then it stops because everybody gets bored. But whether it's really true, that it's non-gendered, non-this and that, and of course,
Yeah.
it probably isn't. But that there's the possibility of even intrigue.
Yeah.
It's intriguing.
Yeah.
Because there, you can build certain sort of travelings that you
Yeah.
can't in
Yeah.
the body. So it does
Yeah.
resonate with the notion of pre-body or out of the body. Or the idea that that's bad. See, here's one of those moments. And there's all this writing where this destroys the body, and that's always bad, that's always bad, it's always bad, it abstracts, but it's always bad. I think that just saying that's bad all the time will not open up thought about how to deal with that. But I know how to think that way, of course. Like you say, I know how to think that abstracts the body, women will suffer more from it, blacks will suffer. I know how to do it in 10 seconds almost. And I'm not saying that maybe we shouldn't run those through all the time in our heads, but I know that there's a limit to thinking those thoughts. One being that people are going to do that. That's always on my mind, and while they're doing it, I'll have very little critical to say to them if all I can say is don't do it.
Oh, yeah.
Which is somewhat how it comes down eventually when you say, if you care about those who don't have jobs or those who don't, you can't do that. So I don't know how to deal with that either. That's not an answer, but I want to both be aware of those things and try to address some of the questions you raised in ways that don't just say, let's be against technology. Because, boy, we've written a lot of stuff like that. Let's be against this or...
Well, this experience hooked into me with everything you said about tele-technology and about things being very momentary. It just seemed like a good follow-up.
Oh, definitely. I wish I
It's
knew...
all there.
I mean, I don't know much about this stuff. I tried to imagine it without, myself being that. Most of a kid who's uninterested in it. It's interesting.
I used to be a professor in Berkeley who had a background in physics and chemistry.
Big issue in my head, and it goes back to your questions too, about, most people, no matter who, just, Heidegger, blah, blah, at some point when you talk modern technology and capitalism seems so intertwined. I mean, surely we know that there's technology before capitalism, so they're not reducible to each other, but it's hard to if you look at military development, I mean, it's hard to separate them. But it seems to me that we may be at a point where that entwining has become so fine and so intense that it is time to imagine a way that they're not connected to each other, or that they part from each other in some way, to reassert critically the difference between them so that we could follow and see and therefore produce the beauty of technologies, because I don't think we're going to leave them. And I don't know if I think capitalism, do you think capitalism is ever beautiful? And maybe we need to think that some capitalizations,
See, I may have been crude about my Marxism, but to me, being a Marxist meant you were against capitalism. The whole thing, everywhere, no matter where, whenever it was.
No. Marxism is spiral development. Capitalism involves a greater freedom for mankind than had existed
And then you
before.
overcome it and you
Oh,
do
right,
something
right.
else.
I thought you said always capitalism.
Oh, no. So,
Okay.
you know, I don't anymore think about overcoming capitalism. That's why I don't think I'm a Marxist anymore. I think that capitalism is not one thing. I think it should be thought as many things. And I think there's some places where I don't know how to be what I would call capitalizations. I'm not against them. I mean, I would like to think that thought, but I don't, you know, I'll look to those who would tell me better, but I don't know what the downsides of that are.
Well, I think,
What do you
at
think
least
about it?
in my reading of Marx, capital is not just about the object.
Right.
So to the extent that capital is just money making more money, you don't have this basis for anything generative. And the generativity of capital has to do with the socialization process.
Right.
And that socialization, as I read Marx, also cuts through, you know, what you're calling technology. That is to say, it's not just the object, it's also all the practical competencies. You know, labor doesn't ever exist, you know, as just the fleshy stuff.
Right.
You know, you
Right.
only get labor through some sort of, as you're describing it, substrate. You know, people
Right.
got to do something. They can't, you know, just do it with cells.
Right,
They do it in relation to object.
right.
You know. And I think even there, it's interesting. Like, even backing the story up anthropologically, you know, pre-humans, right, were engaged in technological processes, right? I mean, tool use spans between 2.5 to 5 million years, right? There's no point at which, I mean, all the things, speaking, walking, tooling around, those things get unpacked over millions of years. Homo sapiens is supposed to be about 40,000, 100,000. So clearly, you know, there's no...
Yeah.
Well, I think
There's
Marx
no
would argue
moment
there was
of-
a qualitative difference in terms of development of technology when capitalism evolved. That in terms of the speeding up of it, in terms
Or
of
whatever,
development.
there's
Right,
some
that's
kind of
what Marx would
linkage.
argue. And, you know, I think we said this at the beginning, Marx would also argue that technology is the salvation, right, of mankind.
yes.
Right, that's the end of it. In other words, it's
yeah.
technology that leads to abundance that provides for full communism. Nothing but, right?
I
The
don't,
techno-
yeah, I think that is one Marxism, but I think there are some other ones that are equally as
Like?
intriguing. Like,
I was going to say, I don't know
Yeah.
if I ever read him say it's a salvation, but I never read him to be anti-technological.
Right.
I don't. And some, so the other one?
so the other one I think is that these associations, these things that get generated as and through society is what the ends are. In other words, one account is the account of the movement from scarcity to abundance, right? And that's the technology narrative. Right? I would say, in a sense, you don't really need Marx for that narrative. There's plenty of folks pre-Marx who he's no doubt influenced by. So it's not that it's not there in Marx. I agree with you, absolutely. Of course it's there. But what I see making Marx difference is that the things we're calling technology, or what people, you know, do together and how they enter into these arrangements, now becomes an object of history. It becomes historicized. So these kinds of questions,
The socializations.
and hence the question of technology enters into history in a way that it couldn't have before. So what technology, what kinds of
man makes his own
arrangements.
future. Yeah.
Right. So in that sense, I think, to me, the specific stakes in relation to what Patricia's saying is, and in relation to some of the issues you were raising, is the politics that we want to stake around the elimination of scarcity, hence, you know, everyone getting a job, making sure that whatever we produce, that it's distributed so that everyone gets to eat and live somewhere. On the one hand, you say, of course, that's the case.
Yeah.
Ironically, that would keep you within capitalism as we know it, since it's hard to compete with the, you know, thing-generating machine
Right.
that capitalism turns out to be.
Right.
So for me, the interesting thing about Marxism is, what else does capital generate? It generates this other that it always refuses, rejects, turns its back on, is indifferent to. I mean, the interesting thing about the internet example is that usually...
Meaning socialism could be named.
Yeah, socialism is the internal condition of
Okay,
capitalism.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
not the after.
Okay, all right, yeah.
You know,
Yeah, But the other, what other? It has no name, this other that capitalism produces?
no, I mean, for Marx, it's called socialism.
Oh, okay,
communism,
all right.
But I'm saying
Yeah, I hear you,
it's
okay,
not
I
the-
just wanted to be sure.
It is the thing that is within and against,
Right,
rather than
of course.
after.
Right, oh, yes.
After we finish
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
the capitalism
All
thing.
right, all right.
Yeah.
So what kind of distinction would Marx have made between capitalism and what we call today capitalization, where you have small cap, micro cap, big, large cap, and the people who own the things are individuals, shareholders.
Now, Marx has a very interesting discussion of just that in Volume 3 of Capital. And he says, what the shareholder represents is actually the movement from the relationship
Right.
between people who produce stuff and the people who own those means of production, you know, industrial capital, entrepreneurs, to collecting all of that wealth together through things like joint stock corporations and mutual funds and stock markets. So the fact that just like a dollar, the denomination of, you know, total social wealth, so too is a share, a denomination, and a shareholder is an individuated unit, but they don't really
Doesn't-
own anything.
In fact,
Yeah.
But there'd be another distinction between, let's say, a person who works in a company who gets stock options. Between that person and someone who owns shares in the company as a shareholder on the outside.
can I make
it
this
seems like
point?
there's
I mean, it
difference.
seems to
We-
me that Marx always said none of this matters. And
Yeah, and
one of the
also,
problems.
in real terms, none of it matters because, let's look at the figures of capital ownership. What 1% of this nation owns in respect to all of capital.
Yeah.
I mean, so this is a fiction that we really own America through our pension systems. I mean, the top 20% almost owns it all. And if you take it the top 1%, there's a phenomenon, which is just what I did in class 2 weeks ago.
Absolutely.
But I do think what,
Yeah, go ahead.
what Kathy's saying,
Is that small?
Is that?
yeah,
Yeah,
one
that's
half of
small.
1% owns 49% of the
Oh, you're
stock.
using that statistic,
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
But on the other hand, I think what you're saying is very interesting because to the extent that you do get stock in a corporation you're part of, one of the things it does is it eliminates the distinction between inside and outside.
Yeah.
So that if anything, what the worker is then subject, if they're interested in their own future, is the undermining of their condition as a worker, right? They have to be for downsizing, they have to be for re-engineering, they have to be for plant closures, if they're simply going to pursue their self-interest.
Not in the short run, though.
Well, I
Not in
mean,
the short run. I mean, come on. I mean, that's what I'm saying. One has to deal with
yeah.
the way people are living. Let me use this example. In terms of my argument with the Nation crowd and others, and could be other people around this table feel the same way. When elections come up, okay, and the argument comes about among, if you will, the unreconstructed Marxists and some of the Nation crowd, it really doesn't matter, Jack. And I'm saying, it really doesn't matter to we who are in the comfortable middle class. To the people who are on welfare, to others, it does matter because
What
that
matters?
marginal amount that they will get does affect the way they will live. And you just can't disregard the way people are affected by the politics of this nation.
Right. And but the it being what? You said it doesn't matter.
Yeah, what was
What is
Who
the
wins?
it?
Who wins?
Who wins what?
the
The
election?
election. Who wins? Whether it's Bush or...
Whoever said it didn't matter, I've never said
No,
it.
I'm not saying you said, but I'm saying, but that's part of it, where you're saying the worker should be against his job. In the short run, he can't be.
Right. No, what I was saying is that it introduces that problem for people.
In the
for
short
work.
run, he has been, though.
Yeah.
I mean, I maybe he shouldn't have been, but I think the short run and the long run are getting closer together in your
Right.
scenario.
Right.
Which is another reason to think of leakages rather than overcomings. You know, and the whole working class being collectivized in such a way to overcome. I don't know what happens to those models. Or,
So,
I don't
right,
know if it
yeah.
means as, let's go the other route, that because Marx, I thought, would invite you to say none of those things you say make a difference, because, there's this and this and this, and it all comes down to the 1% in the end. Well, what's the politics there? What is the line? It doesn't make a difference. What does this create for politics?
Oh,
You asked
right,
me,
right,
what's my politics?
right.
What's that politics? It makes me want to put a pillow over my head. And how do you translate the 1% that owns into cultural phenomena? How do you translate it into race, class, even those? I mean, we've tried, and you can bring it back over and over again, but it also began to slip away from it in some way. So what is that politics? Jack.
Put him on the spot.
What is that politics? When I look at that 1%, what am I supposed to do?
Oh, well, in
Reach
other
for
words,
my
the
gun.
simplest explanation would be you go back to the first sentence of the manifesto, after the joke.
I knew it.
All this is a hitherto class struggle. I'm just saying, that's the politics.
Well, I don't know if I don't.
Well, yeah,
I'm just
exactly.
saying,
I
that's
don't
what it
know
comes
if
down
I
to.
don't
You
know
want-
if I've
that-
been
that's
out
not
in
a-
class struggle. I don't know that I have.
Well, I
just don't know what
right.
it is. What?
No, I was going to say, to me at least, the syntax of the manifesto is that that's not, I mean, obviously it's a statement replete with politics to say that. On the other hand, it's not programmatic. I mean, the structure of the manifesto is, let me tell you what's come down, and class struggle is used as a framework for accounting for the movement of history.
Oh, but
But then the program, of course, comes after, including the call for revolution, comes after you've said, this is what's revolutionary in history, not about people choosing to do one thing or the other. So in a way, the statement, all history is the history of class struggle, is
But
not
all
a politics per se.
But the other part of it is that history proceeds through human action. I forgot the exact phraseology. That it's human action, right? Human beings in motion that
Yes.
creates history. It isn't simply theoretical.
Definitely.
Theoretical conception.
But-
And so what?
Yeah.
Well, the end of the manifesto then, workers of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but to change. Is an argument of human beings getting together on basis of classes to revolt. I mean, that seems to me, I think that's the only conclusion we'll come to that Marx said. That workers of the world have to unite. They have no country, etc. All of them, right? I can't see how one can come to any other conclusion in terms of what Marx meant. That the revolutionary force, social force, is the proletariat of, not of any nation, but of the world.
Do you agree?
So let's say we said, yes, that's true, and we want to now figure out a politics in the way you're talking about. That is to say, what do we want
By the way,
to do
I'm
now
not
that
in
we're
any
together?
emotional disagreement with you guys.
No, no.
I'm just-
I'm
right.
listening. I want to hear.
But so
Learning.
let's say that the manifesto is the story of people being together, and I would say
Well, no,
it's a-
not being together, of asking them to get together to do the job that has to be done.
I
That
think there are.
they're forced to do this because of,
Right.
where he was wrong, of declining economic
Right.
circumstances, absolute decline.
But it's very consequential in terms of the first observation you made. That is to say, the letters in the nation, one could say, are about the issue of unity. Right? Something is dividing progressives.
Right.
It shouldn't be. People should be united.
Right.
Well,
Yes.
I happen to think the manifesto is actually a really good document for that problem. Why? Because it does not begin with unity. It doesn't say you can start politics with unity. It only says that unity, in the sense of doing stuff together consciously, organizationally, can be the consequence of having already found yourself together. Right? Because all of the stuff about
Absolutely.
breaking down walls and people being drawn together,
The faded.
that's the social movement, not in the organizational sense, in the historical sense that you were alluding to. So I think the manifesto is pretty sly that way. It on the one end is arguing all history is the history of class struggle, that basically says we find ourselves together. That's our condition
And in
of
fact,
being.
I wonder at the moment, do we?
Well,
Or have we?
not like
Oh, no, we don't find
experientially, but situationally we find ourselves together.
We do.
Right? We're thrust together in all kinds of ways.
No,
It
I
generates
believe you.
differences.
Is there we's at the moment that find themselves together?
On some level, absolutely. And I would accept Marx. I would say there's more of that. The fact that we have sexuality, gender, nation, environment. We have all of these languages to talk about difference as a sign of the ways in which we've been brought together, right? We recognize, I mean, that's not very long that you could use those categories to recognize what's different about people. That's what I see as the historical thing he's
A
describing.
struggle out.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that everyone feels the same feeling or knows themselves to be the same person.
No, right.
But
Certainly
difference is
there's
shared.
a clearing that always is implied there of being able to see the convergences or not.
Well, again, I think if you read that thing carefully, there's a
Tricky,
funny thing
isn't
that
it?
happens in
It's
the
a
midst
tricky
of that,
thing,
people come into consciousness, and that's this thing called the middle class. Marx, in the middle of the manifesto, says, suddenly switches voice. He's talking to workers, and
Yes.
suddenly he starts talking to the bourgeoisie. And what is he saying to the bourgeoisie? He's talking to the bourgeoisie, in a sense, in the workers. And what is that problem?
Yeah,
That problem is that workers are affiliated with property, not just like they believe in it and they shouldn't.
And
But he
there
says
we
this
go.
problem of the
And
middle class itself
there we go.
is what makes us, is one of the conditions through which we get to be together. And it's a condition that negates the ability to actually carry this through. And again, that's not a false consciousness problem. That's an actual, the socialization thing is divided in that way. Both brings us together, but
And
brings,
this was, of course, the beginning of some ways of cultural studies. How to think through what you do with the bourgeoisie living within you. I'm serious, absolutely.
It's our birth.
I mean, and we were so overwhelmed about how difficult it was to think through. I mean, this is how we always get into Freud, how to think through, because we began to know that it wasn't just, oh, look, he's in there, It was like in the skin, definitely. I mean, where cultural studies begins is to take up the complexity of the thinking through that which lives within you that prevents history from realizing itself, as I think Marx imagined wasn't just dependent on people. That it was ready.
on action.
Actually, yes. It could move. It was ready to move if nothing dams it a certain way. I don't know how I feel about that, but that point. But
Right.
so, I mean, to free unto each other. I mean, it might take changing even how we think. The notion when you said it's not theory, it's this. First of all, I don't know where theory is. I don't see it there, certainly. I don't know how you separate it from anything else we could talk about, and maybe it's a bad word. Especially now. I think that's probably where I went. I went from thinking the thought of looking for that which is in individuals that prevents, to thinking some conceptualizations that are not just in individuals, because I'm not so sure individuals should be the site for looking at the damming. I don't think they're the interesting site anymore. I don't think they are. I mean, who is on the net? Who's that nameless, genderless thing? Why just pretend that isn't something? And why think it isn't not an individual, although you may also be an individual?
You focus on their content, and then eventually they can't help it. They always tell you who they are. They do.
Yeah.
It's just
confessional
interesting.
genre.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how long it takes them to unmask.
Well, there.
Now,
Well, I have a
speaking of
question for Jack.
confessional.
Confessional.
I know that Patricia was going to read.
Oh, yes.
Well, I don't know. It's a little.
Oh, we have lots of time.
Well,
How
the
much
question-
time?
Quick question
I
for
have a
Jack.
10-minute one.
So, Jack, what is the bourgeoisie in the 90s now? What would be your markers to say this is bourgeoisie, this is a working person?
If I had to make a
Yeah,
quick
like what are,
definition,
Yeah.
people who derive most of their income from property would be members of the bourgeoisie. That's my simple.
But what do you mean by property? You mean?
Whether it's stocks, bonds, business, rather than labor. I mean,
Rather
how
than
to-
salary?
What?
Rather than salary, you mean?
Well, you
What do you
know,
mean?
the corporate officer gets a salary, and most of his income comes from stock options, okay? So salary is
Most of income.
salary is a difficult thing to determine, because even the government figures, when they tell you the median income of the nation in terms of salaries, they throw in all the corporate officer salaries. So the figures are loaded, you know, that way too. But the simplest explanation, yeah, I would say people who derive most of their income from property would be the bourgeoisie.
Okay. We're just
I mean, of course, that doesn't answer all of the, complexities of it, but
interesting.
Well, I would say
Yeah.
that too, in a way, that answer, but would you say that? You live in a...
because in a sense, I just want to say this,
Sure.
in a sense then you're not distinguishing between Marx's productive and unproductive labor, which we discussed, which has little validity anymore. So you can say labor is labor, and making that distinction. Leave it at that. It's a simple, before one goes into the million footnotes.
I always like
But that was such a great...
bourgeoisie because they go either way.
And God knows they have resisted forever. Are we not it? What are we?
No, but I think that was a group that, I don't know, I didn't have to choose, or it was more open to circumstances, how they would go, that it wasn't so much determined or clear where they would find themselves. So,
Right.
Of course, the notion of ownership, I guess I've always thought that what I take from Marx and never can get over, because I think I have gotten over some other kinds of things that don't jump into my mind so quickly, is private ownership. And when you start talking about genes, and the notion of private ownership becomes interesting, it got really, really interesting. That, as far as I can tell, that the patenting of certain genes actually means that there's gene structures in my body that are not mine. And if I had to have access to it, I might, I can't even quite think of it, but if I understand what's going on now, is that once they can figure out certain things in chemical terms or in an equation, they can own that, and that it's alive in your body. It's still owned or controlled by someone. So you don't have the same access to part of your body that someone else does. Well, I don't know what to say about that, but private ownership still.
Well, that's why we shouldn't permit the patenting of genes. It should be collective ownership.
Well, I suspect that people raise the question precisely on
fact,
those
a lot
terms.
of,
No?
My wife's in...
Why are you laughing? I think that's
No, because
true.
my wife's in medical research, and a lot of people oppose the permission
The human
to patent genes. A lot of people do.
Oh, I'm sure. It's
Any
clear.
genes or just human genes?
Any, because of it's
Like nitrogen fixing bacteria?
well, the scenario is so obvious
Yeah.
there. If you say that's a good idea, like private owner.
Lives of
I have to
itself.
see John
Yes.
Franklin.
Like
Thank
Thank
you
you
so
so
much.
much. It was wonderful meeting you.
Thanks.
Good luck. Come to Revolution. Call me. or email
As I
me.
said, in terms of the community I grew up in,
No. I grew up. No, I didn't grow up white, but
this friend of ours has a house out by Stony Brook, and this year, it's a week after May Day, but all the
May Day.
people from this 2-block housing project,
You mean?
probably 500 people
Oh
showed
my
up
God,
for
you're
a May Day celebration.
Wow. You're kidding.
No, this community has
It's
never
what-
broken up in that sense.
That is amazing. That's
Yeah.
great.
And, the division, of course, now it's,
You
talk
are
about
dealing.
extremely great. Of course, there's still a Stalinist, there's still
Yeah.
who never changed. Like an aunt of mine
Right.
would say to me, Jack, how could you be critical of what happened in the Soviet Union? Lenin fed the peasants. She's 90 years old. That's all she remembers.
By
He
the
did.
way, did you see those advertisements in the subway? Firstly, I don't
By the way, I think they're horrible. Do you hate, now that tells me who I am. I think,
About the phone company.
oh, me too,
Yeah.
thank you. I
Jack
thought to
doesn't-
myself,
There's pictures of the statue
there's
pulling down
something
Lenin.
horrible about those.
And it's about freedom, you know, and
Jack doesn't ride the subway.
Haven't been on the subway
your
for
long distance company. Yeah.
You know, I found those advertisements truly shocking and complicated in every sort of way, simply for me, you know, sort of that it brought back the past in some sense, you know, love America or leave it, you know, all the things we've always been through about, you know, this Cold War sort
Right.
of mentality.
And of course,
And then something more awful, I couldn't even quite put words.
the reason that that company can be a company is because the state said they could have a license to be a phone company.
I know, it's so deceptive, exactly. Well, that's your point, isn't it? I mean, you feel like saying, be careful, this is an ad that could turn against you, you know? Are you dumb or what? Unfortunately, most people can't read, so that's good, but
Oh, she'll read something for us. We don't really have to go till 2:30.
Yeah. We want to be read too.
Yeah,
I know,
confession.
I'm going to read, why'd you say confessional? Because one's called a true confession, did I say that?
No, I just had a sense of what might be coming.
Oh, well, there's a long one, I think I won't, which I love because it's about television. Shall I do that one? It's long. I won't do the
Thematic, it's
confessional
good.
one.
You want to do the what?
The confessional one.
Oh, do the confessional one.
You want, the confessional one is, I don't know. Okay, let's vote. Which one do you want? Television or confession? One's more...
You don't have time for both?
They're long. I'll do confession first. No, I'll do television. No, I'll do confession first. This is called A True Confession. And I'm doing these autobiographical things for a million reasons. I don't know why, but here, and I'm not going to take up time doing that. But this is about my first confession, which I made as a child, of course, when I was 7, when people make their first confession. And I should also tell you, because if I do this one first, it'll be too shocking, and then you won't be able to listen. As Randy knows, and that's why he thought, I used to be a Roman Catholic nun for many years. So this is also about, about being...
Down the street.
I actually lived in that big red house down the street. That's why I'm really here.
Local talent.
And here's my television screen when it's off. So this is about that and my family and stuff like that. So you'll know, so you won't say, oh! I love reading them without telling people, and then they lay on the ground. And I wish this was more, I like the other one better because it's a little more, has intellectually more interesting features to it, the one on television. Because I'm really trying to undercut the notion of telling truth and telling your life and telling your stuff. And I don't undercut it enough here. I don't think. It's hard to get sort of lured into how much fun it is telling your stories. Yeah. True confession. My nose up close to the screen, I waited for the hand that would pull back the wooden door, exposing the priest's ear and his other hand, sweeping up and then down, cutting through the air, making the sign of the cross. It was the sign that I was to begin. At 7, I made my first confession. I confessed to adultery. The confessional was no bigger than a closet, except there was no ceiling. Built into one of the church's spires, the confessional seemed open to the heavens. Still, it was close, and while waiting, I felt my knees melt into the red leather kneeler. I slid my hand over the wooden frame around the screen, mahogany, warm to the touch, having been heated up with the passions left off here with secret tellings. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. I have committed adultery. I have committed adultery more than once. My body was trembling with fear and horror and something else. I had disobeyed the 6th commandment, the no-sex commandment, thou shalt not commit adultery. But my horror was turned to confusion as the priest tried to convince me I had committed no sin,
to convince me I did not know what I was saying. The word would not make safe passage across the screen from profane lips to the sacred ear of the Father. No absolution. He offered only to fix me with right words, fixing my sin to silence. No way to move from transgression to promises of never, never again and forgiveness. Invented in the deaf ear of the Father, I was sentenced to right words. Here was the domain of the sayable within which I began to speak the words of passionate attachment to soulful subjection that becomes a habit. First one kneels, and then one believes. It is a habit made unconsciously into a whole cloth for sewing whispered words into pleats and folds of silence. In the year before they make solemn vows, novices live in silence, praying, cleaning, and sewing. Just below the neckline of the long black dress, the pleats are tacked down, 14 in all, each a quarter of an inch wide. The leather cincture or belt, kissed with lips already moving in silent prayer, is wrapped around the pleats, holding the black woolen cloth close to my waist. And the dead crucified Christ body, all but penis naked, hung from a delicate rope around my neck, is tucked behind the belt and made to rest just below my heart, safe and saved, as if in my body to live forever the unforgiven sin. I have committed adultery. I have sinned. Bless me, Father, each novice intones as she's handed a small bundle of black veiling, as the priest blesses and then fixes the veil on my head. 15 decades of rosary beads are attached to the leather belt and let to fall about my right side. I hear myself singing the hymn so long practiced. All the joys which the world has to offer I now reject with gladness, because I have seen the face of Christ, my Lord and Redeemer, and I have heard the call in my ear, the words of God and mine. I promise poverty, chastity, and obedience. This is faith and fiction, a pure fiction, a veiling of the truth, a dream fugue in the head of a teenage girl making costume with bits of Joan of Arc armor and a virgin's wedding gown, trimmed with bridal lace and crowned with white gardenias. Their last sweet, bitter odor fills my nostrils and lingers as my hair is shorn away and the curls fall around my feet. I look down, I look up as my head is pulled back to be wrapped tight in starchy white, made to look straight ahead. I could only see them from the bottom up, from my cot, which was pulled out each night and placed at the bottom of my parents' bed. My sister's was placed along the side. We slept there until she was 15 and I was 11, in that bedroom in the small 3-room apartment where my father, my mother, my sister, and I lived. It wasn't second grade that I vowed to become a nun. It might have been because my teacher's name was Sister Patricia, but I think it was because I won the spelling bee and was given as my prize the book Sister Patricia had been reading to us each day, The Great Women of the Church. Women who had beheaded kings with the sword of truth. Women who had honored vows to a husband leaving homeland to follow him. Women who had forsaken children and simple pleasures. Women who had sinned but promised to live forever repenting. Women who refused to eat, to rest, to speak, to think only but one thought of God. I read the words of the book again and again until they gave shape to my fevered imaginary and form to my impassioned young being, mixing my futures into the past forever, giving my will to live over to the repeated, pleasurable, painful acts of self-renunciation. My body took the face of solitude, a turning inward that goes beyond the self.
with the solitary aim of being only among the poor and the sinned against, the hopeless and the depraved, the ugly and the humbled, their downcast eyes between my young, wide open hands, sorrow and pity, inequality and mercy in closed cycle, repeated until there was a fissure, a breach, and then openings everywhere. One took me to the outside. It was sometime after when I first saw it. I was in a hotel room with a lover when I first saw it. Perhaps it was a gesture, a shift in the arm, a lifting of the thigh. Perhaps it was the sexual position that made me look at him, that made me watch him. I did not always watch him. It was only that last time when I felt the distance of the far-off country from which my lover came, when I saw that his family, his political and religious commitments would prevent him from having any other lover but one so different as me, his exotic other. I reached my hand beyond his head and pressed it up against the wood of the headboard, mahogany. It was then that I saw it, my parents' bodies flashing before my inward eye. I could only see them from the bottom up, as the sheet was thrown off and in slow motion waves landed on my cot. I could only see them from the bottom up, and then I could not see anything at all but bits of metal entwined with twigs and flowers, braids of fine chain and delicate rope and bright lights. My parents' bed was made of mahogany, a rich, brownish red wood. It was beautifully engraved, swirling into pagodas and flowers, intimating secret lovers. Above the bed hung a large crucifix. The wood was twisted into looking like tree bark. The body, cast in burnt bronze, glowed with excruciating pain. At night, the wood would let loose the nails, and the body would begin to slip. The white loincloth would float up above the thorn-crowned head as he fell, descending into his mother's outstretched arms. She shrouded him and laid him to rest. For a moment, the pietà, and then their bodies arose, flashing before my inward eye. I could only see them from the bottom up, and then I could not see anything at all but my hand writing on white sheets that would not be stilled, sentenced to write words without forgiveness.
That's a poem.
Yes, of sorts. Of sorts, yeah. Nice, huh?
Thank
I
you.
love writing that.
Yeah.
Really nice.
I don't know what it is, but it is.
Well, I hope it gets to be seen by folks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You read it beautifully.
I've actually read them at sociology conventions, can you believe? And people like them.
Yeah.
And they
I
usually
can
don't.
imagine it can only improve things.
Yeah.
It is a little like a television one too.
It's longer, so you better decide. This one is really very nice for what we've been doing, because it goes at the beginning of my book to explain the inner workings of my relationship to machines. Yeah, it's called Television, a Sacred Machine. The title is meant to trick you. It is meant to keep you, perhaps to keep me too from being afraid of me, because I'm drawn to the machine, because I'm drawn in by the machine that draws me out, that draws me apart. I'm afraid that you will see that it excites me, being drawn out, being drawn apart, being drawn out into parts. It is an apparatus of display, the machine. It holds me on display, holds me to the display,
It is made of tacking devices, which sometimes attack me without pity like projectiles, tacking me in parts to the display. I am afraid you will be afraid when you see what comforts me. It is a holding apparatus, the machine. It holds me up, cradles me. It is made of framing devices which negate, reverse, and enlarge. To perfect and protect, it makes me an ideal surface of projection and reception. It already is getting too difficult for you, isn't it? But you said you wanted to understand what I was saying. I'm not saying. I am desiring the machine. I am the machine's desire. The desiring machine alone knows my desire. It keeps it. It repeats it. In the machining of my desire, I am not located. I am arrested and displayed in arresting positions, held and beheld. Would it be easier if I said, in postmodernity, increasingly controlled is applied to people's routine existence by the apparatuses of education and entertainment, which exact identification and consensus? It would be easier, but it would be different. This is not only about ideology, about arrested and arresting political positions, nor is it only about self-exposure, an autobiographical antidote for a closeted, all-knowing I. My machine has more parts. It has more action, like the action of fingertips attached to ivory keys, playing in between the beats of a metronome's patterning. My first piano came from my grandparents' house, a barreled organ. It became a street piano as it transmigrated from Brooklyn to Queens, to the 3-room apartment where I lived and where it was placed up against the wall. From there it beckoned me, gently at first, but then more and more insistently. It was an upright, and when being played, the wooden face over the strings and hammer devices was to be left slightly ajar. It was for better sound, but it also wasn't exposing. I could see the machine's action. I could see the strip of red felt ribboning through the strings. I could see the hammer devices, which when moving seemed like marching toys, not so friendly, but regular and regulating. Like the keys, meeting the eye, meeting the fingers all at once, as the wooden cover over the keyboard was slid back into the piano's insides. I once heard a jazz musician say that reading music is not as good as playing through one's feelings with one's body. But I do read music, and I am ashamed that my body won't speak to the piano, that my body wants to be so dumb. I want the piano to speak to me. I want it to draw me out as it first drew me to it, drew me apart from the 3-room apartment. If I were very still, the piano would grab me by the fingertips. It would speed me up, slow me down, take me high, take me low. The piano bench would gently support my body's flight into a trance of mobile immobility. This is not simply sex, a child becoming piano, a body becoming machine. I fear that in your ear my words are already simply sex. Not yet a sex, it is desiring 1,000 tiny sexes in between the keys, in the action of the hammering devices, in the strings, those wrapped thinly for startling and stinging vibration, those more heavily wrapped for somber and sobbing sounds. Not yet a sex, I tell you. I tell you because what I must now tell you is more difficult. The eyes of the piano are down below me, looking up from where my feet attach to the pedals. They see into and through the indifferent spacing between piano and piano bench, backs of knees and elbows, bits of arm and slices of thigh are cut out by the piano's vision. It is not yet a sex, this vision from below shooting up into me. It is not because it is sex that it excites me. It is that I can't see myself like the piano sees me. Its eye is the eye of the outside. It has its own eye. The piano lives and it gives its music to me. And when it does become a sex, one sex, my sex, it is all but unbearable. So it is not until I'm 19 and already for some time a Roman Catholic nun, wrapped tight in black from head to toe and coiffed in starchy white, that I dare approach the church organ for the first time. I tremble before the doubled set of keys at my fingertips. There also is a keyboard beneath my feet, and pipes rise up into the heavens as if growing out of my backside. Once the organ is turned on, I can hardly move without making music. Even the sound of my breathing is in harmony with the Aves ringing through the organ's pipes. I have turned my sex, having been made one, back into a bisexuality of the black and white, of cloth and keys alike. Would it all make more sense if I reminded you that sociologists say that by the early 1960s the television had replaced the piano, which was once in every lower middle class home an object of entertainment, a mark of upward mobility? I would have told you that right from the start, but by the early 1960s I was already gone from the home, in flight, a musical organ, a sacred machine. Actually, it was before the early 1960s that I first took flight from my home. It was in the early 1950s when I had my first piano lesson. I was 6. My teacher, Sister Bernadine, met me at the back door of the convent. Following her, I passed a long row of wooden rockers up against the porch wall. Suddenly we were inside. I was told to walk on my tippy toes, to be quiet as she led me through the refectory. It startled me. Cream-colored dishes and cups all in a row were turned down on the tabletops, under which were tucked small wooden stools. The air pressed its heaviness against my young body. I felt faint with the pleasure of the secret life I was glimpsing, although it did not seem to be for the first time. We moved quickly down a long hall to a small room with a piano up against a wall. The piano was much like mine at home, but it seemed more tired and somehow proud. Sitting before it and next to Sister Bernadine, my back was up against a wall. There was no room in that room that wasn't taken up with the music-making machine. The lesson began with Sister Bernadine holding my 10 fingers between her 2 hands, saying, "Don't just play it, pray it." I wanted to think, but I couldn't, that I was an anointed one, destined, but thinking that I wasn't worthy was a way of being I already knew at 6. Still, I was destined by that piano, destined to find myself in attachment to machines, to find comfort in difficult compositions of sounds and images, drawn less to meanings and more to ordered angles, corners of frames, coordinates of moving surfaces, drawn to the machine, drawn in desire to the machine of desire. I am certain that it would have been easier if I had said, television is part of the way in which exchange value is constructed, distributed, and attached to bodies formed in the general circulation of labor, commodities, and money. It has expanded the zones of value by changing, mediating, that is to say, mechanizing the imaginary of social relations. It would have been easier, but different. This is not only about a political economy of value attached to exchanges between body and machine. It is about the attachment itself. It is about the tacking devices that put up the display, the framing devices that are given to hold and behold. It is to wonder about their location and the micro-movement of the singular finite forces of music accompanying the machine's vision. Ah, the wonder of it. To wonder how it is that the machine's vision is not secondary to my vision, an auto-television. It is the flickering up and passing away of conscious contact. It is to be zapped in and out of a rush of images and sounds. A mother who only loves just enough
not quite the wire mummy of the rhesus monkey experiments of an earlier scientific research agenda, the cold machine. A mother, sensual singing accompanied by a red and white kitchen radio, the music machine. The fat of a childhood body that would be without organs, without a sex, all filled up, all closed in, the dumbing machine. A World War II father, needy, limited, and unfaithful, shot in his army fatigues late in the afternoon with a Brownie camera, the war machine. A father's lap like a couch to sink into while he reads nursery rhymes, the babysitting machine. A 1939 photograph of a bride and groom, young, handsome, red lips and gardenias, the wedding machine. I remember Mama, make room for Daddy, Kukla, Fran, and Ollie. A set of Encyclopedia Britannica brought at the beginning of years of disciplinary study, meant to rationalize the rhythm of images, the cadence of words. What's My Line? The McCarthy Hearings, X-Files, Aliens 3, Terminator 2, Cybernetics, The Genome Project, the wound culture of late afternoon talk shows, machine anthropology. Sheet music, keeping safe the strange language between eye, fingers, mind, body, and machine. Bright flashes against thousands of lines of pulsing light, a veritable vision of flows of energy and matter, a blue-white halo all around, surrounding, holding my face up close, touching the screen, hard but never too hot, just cool enough. Stories of techno-organic kinships, stories that cannot be passed on only as history. The singularities of a life, which when mined for their richness, should not be made to encourage a swapping of memories, a textual game of, oh, that happened to me too, that stalls the movement of chance, disarms pivots of unpredictable necessity in relations of bodies and machines.
I had another question for you about your psychoanalysis.
That one's nice for this, but
this really answers it.
And the movie.
yeah. That's about, thank you, because that was my way of sort of bringing machines and psychoanalysis in. Thank you.
This was a privilege for me. I need to start all over.
Here.
Well, thank you very
Great.
much.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Really
It's been great.
enlivening.
Very enlivening and stimulating.
I can't really look against you.
I know, but it's